It is only through labor and painful effort, by grim energy and resolute courage, that we move on to better things.
Theodore Teddy Roosevelt. Theodore Roosevelt was a man who overcame many personal sorrows in order to rise up in the American societal ranks, and his efforts paid off, landing him in the highest office in the nation, the United States presidency. Teddy was influential in many ways as president, but one of his most prominent passions was the conservation of important areas across the nation, and he fought to protect several of these places for, as the legislation that established Yellowstone National Park said, the benefit and enjoyment of the people. Welcome back to RAC's Presidential Park series, where we take a look at the presidents of the United States through the national parks to honor and define them. Today we take a look at the person who would push the national parks to the forefront of American culture, a person who we've just introduced to you, but are now going to take a deeper dive into, Mr. TR himself, Theodore Roosevelt. Born in New York City in 1858, Roosevelt grew up in a small townhouse near the Flatiron District. This house was later converted into a museum and a replica of what the residence might have looked like in Roosevelt's time, being placed in the care of the Women's Roosevelt Memorial Association and then the National Park Service as Theodore Roosevelt Birthplace National Historic Site. Roosevelt struggled with asthma growing up, and after his mother, Martha, and first wife, Alice, passed away on the same day, Theodore knew he had to get a change of scenery. Thus, TR boarded a train bound for the Great Plains of North Dakota and spent the next couple of years in the Badlands in and around the newly founded city of Medora. These lands, along with Teddy's cabin at Elkhorn Ranch, were later preserved in his honor as Theodore Roosevelt National Park, currently the only NPS unit with the National Park designation to pay homage to a president. In 1886, Roosevelt married his second wife, Edith Caro, who would stay with Roosevelt for the rest of his life, outliving him and passing in 1948. One of Roosevelt's big breaks came in 1898, when America declared war against Spain and wanted to capture the island of Cuba and the Caribbean for themselves. Roosevelt volunteered to lead a cavalry unit to take the port city of Santiago. At the beginning of July, Roosevelt's forces encountered Spaniard opposition, and Roosevelt cemented his and his troops' name in the history books by attacking Kettle and San Juan Hills, a critical move in giving the Americans the advantage in the war. The group, which became known as the Rough Riders, thrust Roosevelt to the forefront of the American societal discussion, and led to him becoming the vice presidential candidate under William McKinley. McKinley won his election, and Theodore served under him for about half a year before McKinley was assassinated at the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, New York, forcing Roosevelt to suddenly take command of the highest office in the nation. Theodore Roosevelt's presidency began with his inauguration, which took place in the home of Ainsley Wilcox in Buffalo. The house is now preserved as Theodore Roosevelt Inaugural National Historic Site and contains a museum about Roosevelt. During his presidency, TR emphasized giving the American people a square deal, or a fair treatment on several fronts, including regulation of corporations and protection of consumer rights. But near and dear to Roosevelt's heart was none other than conservation, and that's what we'll focus on for this video. Teddy created 5 national parks while in office, including the remains of volcano Mount Mazama at Crater Lake and the impressive Anasazi cliff dwellings at Mesa Verde. He went on a camping trip with conservationist John Muir in the Yosemite Valley in 1903, and 3 years later finally convinced California to turn Yosemite Valley over to the national government to combine with the already federally protected lands around the valley to create one unified Yosemite National Park. It was in 1906 that Roosevelt took one of the biggest steps in the history of the national parks and signed into law the Antiquities Act, legislation that allowed the president to proclaim places of historical or scientific interest as national monuments. While not directly being able to make national parks, this act was a huge leap forward in protecting many of the United States' natural and historic treasures for decades to come. Roosevelt immediately made use of the Antiquities Act, proclaiming the first national monument in the very same state the first national park largely resided in, Wyoming. Devil's Tower National Monument in northeast Wyoming was the first in what would become a long line of national monuments, spread out across the United States and its territories. While he was president, and even after he left office, Roosevelt had a home on Long Island in New York that he would often go to, known as the Summer White House. The residency was officially known as Sagamore Hill and is under the jurisdiction of the NPS today as a National Historic Site. Following his impactful 2-term presidency, Teddy went on an African safari before returning to try and seek a 3rd term as an independent party, but was unsuccessful in this endeavor. Finally, in 1919, Roosevelt passed away peacefully in his sleep. Theodore Roosevelt's death was a sad moment for the American public, but plans to honor his legacy were soon being put into place in several different areas around the country. In the Black Hills of South Dakota, Mount Rushmore National Memorial saw his face carved in rock amongst Presidents George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and Abraham Lincoln. partly because of his legacy, partly because, well, Roosevelt had been a supporter of the sculptor Gutzon Borglum, so maybe this was Borglum's way of showcasing a personal tribute to the deceased president. And in Washington, D.C., a small island in the Potomac River that had been largely neglected was transformed and renamed Theodore Roosevelt Island, a fitting natural memorial amidst the urban life of the nation's capital. These were just a few of the national park units that Theodore Roosevelt impacted, and if we were to list them all, we'd be here for a really long time. But it cannot be understated that Theodore Roosevelt had an intense passion for conservation and the outdoors, and few other presidents before or since have contributed as much to the preservation of America's natural and historical wonders as the nation's 26th president, Teddy Roosevelt, TR. Thanks for watching. In our next episode, we'll be discussing the presidents of the early 20th century and how the national parks would ultimately come together through the foundation of the one, the only, National Park Service. See you then!